Socialism isn't just an economic model. It's not just a set of policies about sharing wealth or a different view of property or equality. That would be staying on the surface. Deep down, modern socialism has become an ideological expression of two of the oldest, most sneaky, and most destructive deadly sins humanity has ever known: envy and laziness. Many people think socialism is about social justice, a noble reaction to inequality, a legitimate search for fairness. But beneath the surface of good intentions, what really drives many of its modern versions is a moral sickness, resentment towards those who have succeeded and the comfort of not taking responsibility for one's own failure. It's a rebellion not just against material inequality, but also against merit, effort, and freedom itself. Envy isn't just distorted admiration for what someone else has. It's not simply feeling uneasy about another person's success. It's something much darker, more corrosive, more primitive. Envy is the desire that others don't have what I can't achieve. It's the urge to destroy what reminds me of my own limitations. It's an emotion that doesn't seek to rise, but to drag others down to the same level of frustration. It is, in its purest form, a thirst for equality, not based on justice, but on resentment. On the surface, modern socialism dresses itself in the garments of compassion. It presents itself as a doctrine of social justice, mutual aid, and protection of the weakest. But under this benevolent discourse too often hides a deeply destructive impulse, the desire to take from others, not to have more, but so they have less. It's not a struggle for collective abundance, but a crusade against individual prosperity. As if the success of others is in itself an injustice. If I don't have it, you shouldn't either. That's the silent cry fueling many contemporary socialist policies. It's not about creating wealth, but redistributing someone else's. It's not about lifting those at the bottom, but bringing down those at the top. It's not about encouraging merit, but punishing it so no one stands out, so no one bothers the mediocre with their excellence. Socialism's promoters don't fight to expand opportunities, they fight to control the results. And when they don't like the results, because some have more than others, because some produce more than others, because some take more risks than others, then they wave the flag of redistribution, which is nothing more than the institutionalization of justified looting. And all of this is sold with language carefully designed to sound virtuous: social justice, equality, solidarity, collective rights. Words that sound good, that appeal to empathy, but that transform into tools of manipulation when they are used to justify legalized theft, the confiscation of the efforts of others, and the suppression of individual liberty. Because true justice does not consist of treating everyone the same in terms of results, but in guaranteeing equal opportunities so that merit, discipline, and talent can flourish without being crushed by resentment. But socialism does not tolerate merit because it does not tolerate difference. And it does not tolerate difference because its engine is not admiration, but envy. In societies infected by this ideology, anyone who prospers is suspicious, anyone who starts a business is selfish, and anyone who gives jobs is an exploiter. Meanwhile, the person who does nothing becomes a symbol of so-called systemic oppression, and they are given rights that are not based on duties fulfilled but on the story of never-ending victimhood. And this is how a culture is built where failure is protected, but success is punished. Where misery becomes a political argument and prosperity an ideological crime. Where beautiful words hide miserable intentions. Envy, when disguised as public policy, destroys nations from within. It transforms into laws, taxes, and social programs that don't lift people up, but keep the masses dependent. And all of this is done with a smile, with fiery speeches, with empty promises. But the end result is always the same: moral decay, the destruction of merit, and the stagnation of society. In short, socialism isn't an ideology of justice, but an ideology of resentment. It's not based on love for one's neighbor, but on hatred of the prosperous. It doesn't propose a community of effort, but a forced sharing of the efforts of others. And that, no matter what fancy names you give it, remains the same thing: envy transformed into policy. The idea that everyone should earn the same, no matter how much they work, how much they study, how much they risk, or how much they contribute to the general well-being, is not only an economic absurdity but also a moral absurdity. It goes against one of the most basic and natural laws that govern both nature and human societies. the law of cause and effect. In a healthy world, the one who sows the most, reaps the most. The one who works with discipline and consistency gets better results. The one who innovates, takes risks, and creates value deserves to enjoy the benefits of their efforts. But under socialism, this logic is reversed. Those who stand out are penalized, and those who hide are rewarded. Forced equality is not equality before the law, which is a just and necessary principle, but equality of outcome, regardless of merit or sacrifice. This concept, promoted as an ideal of justice, is actually a tool of oppression disguised as virtue. Because when everyone must receive the same thing no matter what they do or don't do, what is created is not a fair society, but a culture of mediocrity, demotivation, and resentment. Who's going to give their all if, in the end, they get exactly the same as someone who did absolutely nothing? What motivation does a doctor have who studied for 10 years, the entrepreneur who risked their life savings, the worker who gets up at 5 in the morning if the fruits of their labor are absorbed by a system that redistributes it in the name of false solidarity? What kind of society are we building when excellence, courage, or discipline offer no reward, but instead arouse suspicion, and are punished by a state apparatus that sets itself up as the supreme judge of fairness? It is, fundamentally, a society that nips excellence in the bud. That destroys innovation before it even begins. That crushes personal initiative to impose an artificial uniformity that only benefits those who hide behind a permanent victimhood. And the most dangerous thing about all of this is that this forced equality doesn't lift up those at the bottom, but pushes down those at the top. It doesn't create real opportunities, but destroys the ones that already exist. It doesn't eliminate injustice, but multiplies new forms of injustice. Now, effort, sacrifice, and talent are not only unrecognized, but are the target of mockery and confiscation. In this context, the message sent to new generations is devastating. Don't make an effort, don't stand out, only do the bare minimum. Because no matter what you do, you'll get the same as everyone else. With this logic, who's going to start a business? Who's going to study beyond what's required? Who's going to innovate, dream big, build something that transcends? No one. Because the system is designed so that everyone walks at the same pace, even if some are ready to fly. Forced equality is the tombstone of meritocracy. And when we bury meritocracy, we also bury progress, true justice, and hope. We sacrifice individual freedom on the altar of collectivism, and we establish the reign of conformity as a national virtue. The end result is a society where effort is meaningless, where creativity is stifled, and where the only thing that thrives is resentment between those who give everything and receive little, and those who give nothing and receive just as much. This is why true justice can't be based on equal outcomes, but on equal opportunities and respect for personal merit. Everything else, no matter how nicely you dress it up, is just a modern form of collective slavery where a few decide and everyone loses. If envy is the emotional fuel of socialism, laziness is its ideological engine. It's not just a lack of physical action, but a worldview where effort, excellence, and personal responsibility are replaced by the right to demand, by constant complaining, and by waiting to receive without having given anything back. Modern socialism has replaced the figure of the free and responsible citizen with that of the dependent and demanding subject. A toxic dependency relationship is built between the individual and the state, which learns neither to grow nor to fend for itself, but which presents itself as a paternalistic, almost divine figure that must provide everything: food, housing, work, allowances, dignity, and even happiness. It's not about helping the needy temporarily or providing a basic safety net, which is morally legitimate. It's about institutionalizing dependency as a way of life, turning "I have a right to" into an excuse to do nothing, turning the state into a great provider and the citizen into a perpetual customer who always demands more, but never asks what they can contribute. Instead of teaching people how to fish, socialism hands out stolen fish. Stolen, yes, because it's not the government that creates wealth. It's the worker, the entrepreneur, the innovator, the farmer, the one who takes risks. They are the ones who create value. The government just collects, distributes, and often wastes. And when the fish run out, because other people's wealth runs dry, socialism doesn't question its own inefficiency or corruption. It blames the market. It blames the rich. It blames capitalism. It blames everyone, except itself. Deep down, the ideological parasitism of socialism rests on a very clear premise. Other people should work for me. It doesn't matter if I don't study, if I don't make an effort, if I don't produce anything, if I don't take any risks. I have the right to live at the expense of others, and if they don't want to give me what I demand, then they are selfish, exploitative, insensitive. This isn't solidarity, it's reverse slavery. Why should someone who gets up at 5 in the morning, who works 12 hours a day, who risks their capital, who pays salaries, who creates jobs, who pays taxes, have to support someone who does absolutely nothing? Why should merit be punished and inaction rewarded? What justice is there in the effort of some supporting the comfort of others? Laziness, when it becomes a political virtue, destroys nations, because it kills the spirit of initiative, because it stifles creativity, because it neutralizes the value of sacrifice, and because it transforms people into shadows of their former selves, passive, dependent, frustrated beings, eternally bitter because the state didn't give me anything, that the rich man didn't pay me, that the system didn't recognize me. Instead of encouraging self-reliance, pride in a job well done and the desire to progress, socialism creates generations who don't know what it means to build, but who know perfectly well what it means to complain, who don't know the value of hard work, but who have mastered the art of complaining, who don't understand freedom as the ability to choose, but as a right to demand that others solve their lives for them. And so, while some produce, others consume. While some build the country, others leech off it. And all of this under the moral justification that everyone has the right to live with dignity. Of course, but dignity isn't begged for, it's built. Socialism, beyond being an economic doctrine or a political philosophy, has in many cases become an emotional and psychological deformation of the individual. Not in everyone, of course, but in a large number of those who embrace its message with an almost religious fervor. They don't dream of prospering or building or improving their lot in life. They dream of destroying those who have already made it. The average socialist doesn't envy the rich person because they have a luxurious life. They hate them because their very existence reminds them of what they don't have, what they haven't accomplished, or what they haven't dared to try. And instead of turning this difference into inspiration, they turn it into resentment. They can't stand to see that someone has prospered without asking permission, without owing anything to the state, without justifying themselves. They believe, or rather they need to believe, that no one can possess so much without having taken something from someone else. Here's the wounded heart of socialist ideology. A wound of inferiority that isn't healed by work, effort, or merit, but by the fantasy that other people's success is illegitimate. And this wound is fed day after day by a dangerous narrative, that everything others have was unfairly snatched away, that the poor are eternal victims and the rich perpetual perpetrators. It doesn't matter if the entrepreneur started from nothing, if the professional sacrificed for years, or if the innovator created something valuable. In the eyes of resentment, all wealth is suspect. But the truth, the one never spoken in ideological circles, is much harsher. If many of these people had the money and power they criticize today, they wouldn't share it. They would use it the same way, or even worse. Because the problem isn't wealth. The problem is who has it. If someone else has it, then it's unfair. If I have it, then I deserve it. Here's the big moral difference between the honest capitalist and the two-faced socialist. The capitalist admits they're looking out for themselves and their family. They don't hide it. And many, when they do well, they help out, they invest, they create jobs, they give, they share. Not because they have to, but because it's the right thing to do, out of thankfulness or a real sense of responsibility to their community. The socialist, on the other hand, preaches about total giving. With other people's money, they say everything belongs to the people, but they live off of other people's money and never share their own. They rant and rave about privilege, all while trying to become part of the political class that hands it out. They talk about poverty, but avoid experiencing it themselves. And so, socialism becomes a factory of emotional toxicity. It creates resentful, dependent citizens, aggressive towards the success of others, passive in the face of their own failures, unable to accept their responsibilities, and ready to justify any abuse if it comes from their side. This isn't solidarity, it's emotional parasitism. This isn't justice, it's vengeance in disguise. This isn't superior morality, it's an ideological disguise to justify what deep down, is just accumulated hate. A society cannot be built on such foundations. For a nation made up of people who hate those who create, those who work, those who take risks, is a nation condemned to worship ruin and pursue misery, believing it to be a virtue. Socialism doesn't fail occasionally. It's not that it hasn't been implemented correctly yet, or that it works in theory but not in practice. No, socialism always fails in every context, in every era, with all its variations. And it does so not only for economic reasons, which are obvious, but for something much deeper, more corrosive and more dangerous. Because it is based on a distorted moral vision of human beings and society. Socialism is built on the idea that we are all victims of the system, that no one should face the consequences of their actions, that the property of others is something relative, and that the state has not only the ability, but also the divine right to redistribute wealth as it pleases, even if it didn't create this wealth, even if this wealth belongs to specific people, the fruit of years of effort, sacrifice, and merit. According to this logic, success is not something you achieve through work, but something suspicious. Poverty is not a circumstance to overcome, but a perpetual identity that grants unlimited rights. The difference between individuals is not a reflection of diverse talents, different decisions, or different degrees of effort, but proof that there is something unfair in the system. And so, everything becomes justified. Confiscating, redistributing, punishing, limiting, intervening, silencing. All in the name of a supposed justice that, in reality, doesn't seek to lift anyone up, but to level everyone down, so that there are no guilty parties, no one responsible, no personal successes or failures, only a uniform mass, docile and dependent on the central power. It's no coincidence that the countries that have embraced this ideology end up in ruins, without exception. Venezuela, destroyed by redistributive populism, with millions of people fleeing the socialist paradise. Cuba, an island full of talent and culture, transformed into an ideological prison for more than 6 decades. North Korea, the most extreme experiment in collectivism, where the people starve while the regime gets rich. Nicaragua, where democracy has been eliminated in the name of the people, but where the people are subjected to an impoverishing dictatorship. Why do all socialist roads lead to the same destination? Because when you reward laziness and make envy the system, no productive system can survive. Because no economic model can last if it punishes those who create and rewards those who do nothing. Because encouraging effort, work, merit, and risk-taking is the foundation of any successful civilization. And when that encouragement disappears, everything else crumbles with it. The failure of socialism isn't technical, it's moral, because it doesn't understand humans as free, responsible, creative, and dignified beings, but as eternal victims who need to be taken care of, controlled, and directed from above. And this model, sooner or later, becomes impractical, unsustainable, and authoritarian. Socialism isn't just a miscalculation, it's a betrayal of human nature. The real antidote to the moral sickness that socialism represents isn't forced charity or institutionalized welfare. It's not by subsidizing entire generations or designing systems that turn citizens into chronically dependent people without autonomy or their own horizons that will solve the problem. This model, which has been implemented in different forms in various parts of the world, doesn't just fail in terms of productivity and economic growth, it fails above all on the most important point: the spiritual and moral integrity of the human being. Human beings are by nature teleological creatures. We develop based on goals, objectives, directions to follow. Our mental and emotional structure doesn't tolerate an existential void for very long. We need to project ourselves towards something, to build a path that has meaning. Without a goal, there is no growth. Without effort, there is no transformation. Without challenges, there is no character. It's no coincidence that the most enduring civilizations, from Republican Rome to post-war Japan, emerged from contexts of hardship and rebuilding. Adversity, far from being an existential threat, is the matrix where the human spirit is forged. The history of progress, personal or collective, is not the history of easy things, but of those conquered with sweat, ingenuity, and sacrifice. Socialism, however, tries to get rid of this basic drive in the human spirit. By getting rid of differences, by promising results without effort, by taking away both responsibility and initiative, it shuts down the inner drive that lets a person grow. It doesn't offer paths for growth but a net to endlessly fall into. It turns the citizen into a customer of the state, and the state into a bureaucratic god that decides what a person should need, think, consume, and be. This isn't just a social policy, it's a flawed view of what it means to be human. It assumes humans can only thrive if they're protected. But true protection isn't avoiding risk but preparing to face it. Giving without asking anything in return isn't kindness, it's treating people like children. The most serious studies in developmental psychology, from Jean Piaget to Erik Erikson and Jordan Peterson today, agree on one key point. Personal growth cannot be separated from effort and controlled pain. Frustration, delaying gratification, challenge, are not bad things to be avoided, but formative steps. A child who constantly has all their problems solved becomes a weak, dependent adult, unable to tolerate frustration and take charge of their destiny. This same principle applies to nations. Societies that have lived artificially supported by paternalistic welfare states, as was the case in some Scandinavian countries before the reforms of the 90s, ended up generating productivity crises, depression among young people, suicides, and a sense of existential uselessness, which forced a rethink of the model. Even Sweden, the favorite icon of democratic socialism advocates, had to liberalize its economy, privatize key sectors, and restrict certain subsidies when it realized that you can't redistribute wealth if you don't create it first. An even more telling example is the case of South Korea and North Korea. Two peoples with the same culture, history, and language. One chose the path of freedom, merit, and innovation. The other, that of absolute control, forced equality, and single-mindedness. The result is a chasm. While Seoul is a world capital of technology, art, and education, Pyongyang survives in darkness, repression, and structural poverty. It's not genetics, it's the system. When effort is punished and passivity rewarded, when success is viewed with suspicion and complaining becomes a political virtue, a devastating phenomenon occurs: the silent collapse of the collective will. A society like this doesn't collapse all at once. It slowly fades away. It loses its dynamism, its creativity, its initiative. Instead of citizens, it creates subjects. Instead of leaders, managers of conformity. Instead of community, a dependent mass without authentic bonds. And this isn't just a theory. We see it every day in countries where government handouts have replaced the culture of work. Entire neighborhoods where 3 generations have known no other way of life than waiting for the government's monthly check. Schools where you don't learn to think, but to obey. Lives trapped in the frustration of not knowing what they could have been if more had been demanded of them, instead of giving them less. That's why, when we encourage individual freedom, responsibility, work, merit, and excellence, we're not proposing a conservative or elitist policy. We are defending the very foundation of human fulfillment. We're saying, you can. You are worth what you are capable of building, not what you demand others give you. And this doesn't just transform the individual, it redeems an entire society. Because in a community where each person sees themselves as the master of their own destiny, there's no limit to what can be achieved. We see innovators emerge, passionate teachers, dedicated scientists, conscious leaders, active citizens. Not because they were given everything, but because they were taught that what truly has value is what you earn. Dignity, like freedom, isn't granted, it's cultivated. On the contrary, socialism promises equality. But when it's put into practice, what it distributes isn't justice, but emptiness. Because by erasing the legitimate differences between people, it also erases their ability to forge an identity. The result isn't a society without poor people, but a society without purpose. And that, in the end, is the cruelest form of poverty, spiritual poverty. Freedom, on the other hand, doesn't promise results. It promises pathways. It doesn't guarantee that everyone will arrive at the same destination, but it ensures that the effort will have meaning. And this single possibility, the one to try, the one to fail, the one to improve, the one to start over, is what makes human life not only worthwhile, but deeply meaningful. In a world where compassion has been mistaken for control, and justice with forced leveling, defending merit, hard work and freedom is not just a simple ideological position, it's an act of radical trust in human beings. And this act, when multiplied, is the one that truly transforms societies.